Zorath circled around Henry like a predator studying its prey. The other Vexari officers watched in silence, their black eyes fixed on the old human sitting in the metal chair. They expected this to be entertaining. They expected the weak creature to beg for mercy. "Let us begin," Zorath said. "Tell me about your fleet. How many ships does humanity possess?" Henry did not hesitate. 342 vessels. Most of them are small transport ships and cargo haulers. We have perhaps 50 military frigates, but they are outdated. Our newest ship is already 20 years old. Zorath nodded. This matched the information the Vexari already had. "And your weapons? What kind of technology do you possess?" "Basic plasma cannons. Some missile systems. Nothing that could threaten a Vexari warship." Henry paused and let out a tired sigh. "You already know all of this, Commander. Your spies have been watching us for decades. Why are you asking questions you already know the answers to?" One of the officers stepped forward. "Perhaps he is lying. Perhaps he is trying to make us think humanity is weak." Zorath held up a hand for silence. He studied Henry's face carefully. "No, he is telling the truth. I can see it in his eyes. Humans are terrible liars." Henry said nothing. He kept his expression empty and defeated. "The real question," Zorath continued, "is whether humanity knows about our plans. Do you know why we captured you, Admiral?" "I assume it has something to do with the fleet movements near our border. We have noticed increased activity over the past few months." Zorath smiled, showing his rows of sharp teeth. "So you do know? Good. Then I will not need to explain. The peace treaty we signed with your species 40 years ago was never meant to last forever. It was simply a delay. We had other enemies to deal with first. But now, those enemies are gone, and it is time to finish what we started." "You mean to invade human space?" Henry said flatly. "Invade is such an ugly word. We prefer to say we are bringing order to a chaotic region of the galaxy. Your species will be given a choice: submit and serve the Empire, or be destroyed." The officers around the room made sounds of approval. They had no doubt about the outcome. Humanity was nothing to them, a minor species that had barely learned to travel between stars. Crushing them would be easy. Henry lowered his head. His shoulders slumped. He looked exactly like what they expected him to be, a broken old man who had accepted his fate. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long until the invasion begins?" Zorath laughed. "You want to warn your people? It will not matter. We have already positioned our fleets. The invasion begins in 3 standard days. By the time any message could reach Earth, our ships will already be in orbit." Henry was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. It was a strange sound in that room full of aliens. It started soft and grew louder until it echoed off the metal walls. The Vexari officers looked at each other in confusion. Zorath's smile faded. "What is amusing, human?" Henry raised his head. The defeated look was gone from his eyes. In its place was something else, something that made Zorath take a step backward without realizing it. "You are," Henry said. "All of you. You have spent so long being the rulers of this galaxy that you have forgotten what it means to be challenged. You look at humanity and see a small, weak species. You see our old ships and our limited territory. You see exactly what we wanted you to see." The room had gone very quiet. "My name is Admiral Henry Call," he continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. "I am the Supreme Commander of the United Human Defense Initiative. And I was not captured by accident, Commander. I allowed myself to be taken." Zorath's hand moved to his weapon. "Explain yourself." 40 years ago, when your empire forced that treaty upon us, humanity was exactly what you thought we were: weak, primitive, unable to defend ourselves." Henry stood up slowly, ignoring the guards who moved toward him. So we signed your treaty. We smiled and nodded and pretended to be grateful for the peace you offered. But we never stopped working. We never stopped preparing. You are bluffing, Zorath said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? Think about it, Commander. 40 years is a long time. Your empire became comfortable. Your technology stayed the same, because why would you need to improve it? You had already conquered everyone who might threaten you. But humanity spent those 40 years doing nothing but improving. Every scientist, every engineer, every resource we had went into one single purpose. Henry took a step toward Zorath. The guards raised their weapons, but he did not stop. We built ships that your sensors cannot detect. We developed weapons that will tear through your armor like it was made of paper. We created defensive systems that will make our planets untouchable. And we hid all of it. We hid it in asteroid fields and hollow moons and underground facilities. We let your spies see exactly what we wanted them to see, while the real work happened in secret. Zorath's scales had grown pale. This is impossible. We would have known. Would you? When was the last time the Vexari Empire actually looked for a threat? When was the last time you considered that someone might be planning against you? Henry smiled coldly. You have grown lazy, Commander, and arrogance makes people blind. Even if what you say is true, Zorath said slowly, you are still our prisoner. You will tell us everything. We will break you and learn all your secrets. You could try, but it would not matter. You see, I am not here to protect our secrets. I am here to deliver a message. What message? Henry looked directly into Zorath's black eyes. His voice was quiet, but filled with absolute certainty. Peace is over. Now we bring war. At that exact moment, a small device hidden inside Henry's body activated. It was a transmitter so small and so advanced that Vexari scanners had never detected it. It sent a single coded signal across the vastness of space, bouncing off hidden relay stations that humanity had secretly placed throughout the galaxy over the past decade. The signal reached Earth in less than 30 seconds. On the bridge of the Claw of Empire, alarms suddenly began to sound. Officers rushed to their stations, shouting in confusion. Zorath spun around to face the main screen. What is happening? He demanded. Commander, an officer reported, his voice shaking. We are receiving emergency transmissions from across the border zone. Human vessels are attacking our outposts. They came from nowhere. We did not detect them until they started firing. Zorath turned back to Henry. What have you done? The old admiral smiled. For the first time in 40 years, humanity was no longer hiding. For the first time in 40 years, the Vexari Empire was going to learn what happens when they threaten the wrong species. I told you, Henry said calmly. We bring war. 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains on Earth. General Patricia Hayes stood in the command center of humanity's most secret facility. The room was vast, filled with hundreds of screens and thousands of officers working at their stations. For 40 years, this place had been the heart of humanity's real defense program. For 40 years, it had remained hidden from Vexari spies. A single light began blinking on Patricia's console. She looked at it, and her heart began to beat faster. This was the signal they had been waiting for. This was the moment that everything changed. Attention all stations, she announced, her voice calm despite the excitement building in her chest. We have received confirmation from Admiral Cole. The Vexari have revealed their invasion timeline. Protocol Prometheus is now active. The room exploded into action. Officers shouted commands. Screens filled with data. Throughout human space, a message was being sent to every hidden base, every concealed ship, every secret facility. The time for hiding was over. Commander Daniel Price was 41 years old. He had spent the last 15 years of his life aboard the UHS Fury of Terra, humanity's first true battlecruiser. The ship had never seen the light of any sun. It had been built inside a hollowed-out asteroid near Jupiter. and had remained there ever since, waiting for this moment. "All hands to battle stations," Daniel announced through the ship's communication system. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. We are activating." Around him, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained for this moment countless times. They knew exactly what to do. "Weapons systems online," reported Lieutenant Marcus Green. "Shields at full power," added Ensign Amy Turner. "All coordinates locked in," said the navigator. Daniel nodded. "Open the hangar doors. Take us out." The massive doors of the asteroid base began to open. Light flooded in, the cold light of distant stars. The Fury of Terra moved forward, emerging from its hiding place for the first time in its existence. And it was not alone. From asteroid fields throughout the solar system, ships began to appear. They rose from craters on dead moons. They emerged from clouds of space dust where they had been hiding for years. 200 warships, each one built in secret, each one equipped with technology that the Vexari had never seen. "All ships reporting ready, General," Daniel transmitted to Earth. Patricia's voice came back clear and strong. "Then begin, Commander. Show them what humanity is capable of." The fleet jumped to hyperspace, disappearing in flashes of light that would have seemed impossible to the Vexari. Their hyperspace technology was 3 generations ahead of anything the Empire possessed. What would take a Vexari ship days to travel, the human fleet covered in hours. They emerged at the border of human space, where the Vexari had established a line of military outposts. These stations were meant to be the launching point for the invasion. They were filled with soldiers and weapons and supplies, all waiting for the order to attack. They never got that chance. Nexus Station was the largest of the Vexari outposts. Station Commander Keth stood on the command deck, reviewing the latest reports from the Empire. The invasion was only 3 days away. Soon he would be leading his troops into human territory. Soon he would earn glory for the Empire. "Commander," one of his officers said suddenly, "our sensors are detecting something strange." Keth turned to look at the screen. "What is it?" "I am not sure. There are objects appearing at the edge of our sensor range. They look like ships, but that is impossible. Nothing can travel that fast." Keth walked closer to the screen. The objects were getting closer, and now he could see them more clearly. They were ships, human ships, but they looked nothing like the crude vessels the Vexari had seen before. These ships were sleek and black, designed for war. "How many?" Keth asked, his voice suddenly tight. 20. No, wait. 40. 60. The officer's voice rose with each number. "Commander, there are over 200 ships incoming." "That is impossible. Humanity does not have that many military vessels." "They do now." Keth opened a communication channel. "Human vessels, you are in violation of the peace treaty. Turn back immediately or we will open fire." There was a brief pause. Then a human voice replied. "This is Commander Daniel Price of the United Human Ship Fury of Terra. We are not here to talk. We are here to send a message." Before Keth could respond, the human fleet opened fire. The weapons they used were unlike anything the Vexari had ever encountered. Beams of pure energy that cut through shields like they were not there. Missiles that moved faster than Vexari tracking systems could follow. Torpedoes that seemed to phase through armor before exploding inside the hull. Nexus Station lasted 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, 3,000 Vexari soldiers died. The station broke apart into pieces, scattering across space like leaves in a wind. And then, the human fleet moved on to the next target. Throughout the border zone, the same scene repeated itself. Vexari outposts that had stood for centuries were destroyed in minutes. Ships that had been preparing to invade human space were caught by surprise and torn apart before they could even raise their shields. Admiral Vorn was one of the Vexari Empire's most experienced commanders. He had led fleets in dozens of battles and had never known defeat. When the alarms started sounding on his flagship, he assumed there had been some mistake. "Report," he commanded. "Admiral, we are under attack. Human vessels have engaged our forces throughout the sector. Losses are already significant." "Human vessels?" Vorn laughed. "Show me." The screen filled with images from across the border. What Vorn saw made his laughter die in his throat. These were not the primitive ships he had expected. These were weapons of war, built by a species that had clearly been underestimated. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "Unknown, Admiral, but our shields are not stopping their weapons. Our armor is not holding. We are losing ships faster than we can count them." Vorn straightened his spine. He was a warrior. He would not run from a fight. "All ships, engage the enemy. Show these humans the might of the Vexari Empire." His fleet moved forward to meet the human vessels. It was a mistake. The battle lasted less than an hour. When it was over, Admiral Vorn's fleet had been reduced to scattered debris. The Admiral himself was dead, his flagship destroyed by a direct hit from the Fury of Terra. Commander Daniel Price stood on his bridge, watching the last of the Vexari ships explode. His crew was cheering, but he did not join them. He knew this was only the beginning. "Transmit to Earth," he ordered. "First phase complete. All primary targets neutralized. Moving to Phase 2. On Earth, General Patricia Hayes received the message. She allowed herself a small smile. For 40 years, humanity had lived in fear of the Vexari Empire. For 40 years, they had hidden their true strength. That time was over. "Send word to all colonies," she ordered. "Let them know that the liberation has begun." Across human space, people looked up at the sky. They had lived under the shadow of the Empire for so long. Now, finally, that shadow was lifting. The war had begun, and humanity was winning. On the bridge of the Claw of Empire, chaos ruled. Officers ran from station to station, shouting reports that grew worse with every passing minute. Alarms screamed without stopping. Emergency lights flashed red across every surface. High Commander Zorath stood in the center of it all, his golden scales now pale with shock. He had been so certain of victory. He had been so sure that humanity was weak and helpless. Now his certainty was crumbling like dust. "Commander," an officer reported, his voice shaking, "we have lost contact with Nexus Station, and Station 12, and the 3rd Border Fleet." "How?" Zorath demanded. "How is this possible?" Admiral Henry Cole stood nearby, still surrounded by guards. But the guards were no longer watching him. They were staring at the screens, watching their Empire's forces being torn apart. "I told you," Henry said calmly. 40 years. We used every single day. You will tell me how to stop this. You will give me the weakness of your ships." "There is nothing to tell. Our ships have no weakness that you can exploit in time. Your technology is 10,000 years old. Ours was built specifically to destroy it." "Impossible. No species advances that quickly." Henry smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You do not understand humans, Commander. When we are comfortable, we grow lazy. We fight among ourselves. We waste our energy on small conflicts. But when we face extinction, when something threatens our very existence, we become something else entirely. We become united. We become focused. We become extremely dangerous." Another officer rushed to Zorath's side. "Commander, human vessels have been detected entering the system. They will be here within the hour." "How many?" 50 ships, sir. Maybe more." Zorath's hands clenched into fists. His flagship was powerful, but it was alone. The rest of his fleet had been sent to join the invasion force. He had never expected to need them here. "Recall all available ships," he ordered. "We will make our stand here." "Sir, the nearest reinforcements are 2 days away. We cannot hold that long." "Then we will die fighting," Zorath snarled. "The Vexari do not run." Henry shook his head. "Pride, that is your greatest weakness. You would rather die than admit you were wrong." "Silence, human." "Or what? You will kill me? That changes nothing. The war has already begun. Whether I live or die, humanity will not stop until your empire is broken." The next hour passed slowly. Zorath tried everything he could think of. He sent messages to the imperial capital, begging for reinforcements. He attempted to contact other commanders, hoping to organize some kind of defense. But the communication channels were filled with chaos. It seemed like human ships were striking dozens of targets at once. When the human fleet finally arrived, the Claw of Empire was waiting. Zorath had positioned his ship near a small moon, hoping to use it as cover. His weapons were fully charged, and his shields were at maximum power. Commander Daniel Price's voice came over the communication channel. "Vexari vessel, this is the United Human Ship Fury of Terra. You are holding Admiral Henry Cole. Return him immediately, or we will retrieve him ourselves." Zorath grabbed the communicator. "Human Commander, I am High Commander Zorath of the Vexari Empire. You are outnumbered by the forces of the greatest power in this galaxy. Surrender now, and we may show mercy." There was a pause. Then Daniel replied, and there was something like amusement in his voice. "I count 1 Vexari dreadnought against 50 human warships." "I think you may have miscounted, Commander. 1 Vexari dreadnought is worth 100 of your primitive vessels." "I suppose we will find out." The battle began. Zorath had expected the humans to attack recklessly, throwing themselves against his shields like waves against a rock. Instead, they moved with careful precision. They spread out, surrounding his ship from all directions. They fired in coordinated patterns, each shot striking exactly where the previous one had weakened his defenses. "Shields at 80%, an officer reported. Then, moments later, shields at 60%. Then, shields at 40%. Zorath watched in disbelief. His ship was the pride of the Vexari Third Fleet. It had destroyed entire enemy armadas without taking significant damage. Now it was being torn apart by creatures he had considered barely more than animals. "Return fire," he ordered desperately. "Target their lead ship." The Claw of Empire's weapons blazed. Beams of energy shot toward the Fury of Terra. But the human ship moved with impossible speed, dodging most of the shots. The few that hit seemed to do little damage. "Their shields are holding," an officer reported in shock. "Our weapons are barely affecting them." Henry Cole watched all of this from his place on the bridge. He felt no pleasure in the destruction happening around him. War was never something to celebrate. But he felt a deep satisfaction knowing that humanity would survive. His people would not be enslaved. His grandchildren would grow up free. The battle lasted 14 minutes. By the end, the Claw of Empire was a broken wreck. Its engines were destroyed, its weapons were offline, fires burned throughout its corridors, and emergency bulkheads had sealed off entire sections of the ship. Zorath stood on his ruined bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen officers. His golden scales were covered with burns and blood. He had fought until there was nothing left to fight with. "Commander," a weak voice said from one of the remaining stations, "we are being boarded. Human soldiers are cutting through the hull." Zorath drew his personal weapon. "Then we will meet them with honor." The humans came through the walls like ghosts. They wore black armor that seemed to absorb light, and they moved with silent efficiency. At their head was a young woman with short dark hair and cold blue eyes. "I am Lieutenant Catherine Walsh," she announced. "We are here for Admiral Cole. Anyone who resists will be killed. Anyone who surrenders will be treated as a prisoner of war." Zorath raised his weapon, but before he could fire, 3 shots hit his arm. He dropped to his knees, his weapon clattering to the floor. Catherine walked past him without a second glance. She found Henry Cole standing calmly amid the chaos, untouched by the destruction around him. "Admiral," she said, saluting, "it is good to see you, sir." "Good to see you too, Lieutenant," Henry replied. "What is the status of the operation?" "All primary objectives achieved. Border defenses neutralized. 3 enemy battle groups destroyed. Casualties on our side are minimal." Henry nodded slowly. He looked around the ruined bridge, at the bodies and the fires and the broken technology. This was what war looked like. This was the price of survival. "Take me home," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." As they walked through the corridors of the dying ship, they passed Zorath. The Vexari commander was being held by 2 human soldiers, his wounded arm hanging at his side. "This changes nothing," Zorath spat. "The Empire will send more ships, more soldiers. You cannot win against us." Henry stopped and looked at his former captor. "You still do not understand, do you? We did not start this war to conquer your empire. We started it to survive. And there is nothing in this entire universe more dangerous than humans fighting for their survival." He turned and continued walking, leaving Zorath behind in the ruins of his ship and his pride. 6 months had passed since the first shots of the war. In that time, the galaxy had changed more than it had in the previous 1,000 years. Admiral Henry Cole stood at the window of his office on Earth, looking out at the sky. He was 74 years old now, and the war had added new lines to his face, but his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still clear. He had led humanity through the most dangerous period in its history, and they had survived. More than survived. They had won. The door behind him opened, and General Patricia Hayes entered. She looked tired, but happy. In her hands, she carried a datapad with the latest reports. "The Vexari Emperor has officially requested peace negotiations," she announced. "He wants to meet in person." Henry turned from the window. "Where?" he asked. "Neutral territory. The station at Delta Point. He is bringing a small delegation, just advisors and guards. He wants this done quickly and quietly." "Of course he does. The longer this war continues, the more his empire falls apart." It was true. The Vexari had ruled through fear for 10,000 years. But fear only worked when people believed you were unbeatable. Humanity had shattered that belief. Now, throughout the empire, other species were beginning to rise up. Slave populations that had served the Vexari for centuries were suddenly finding the courage to fight back. The empire was crumbling, and everyone knew it. "When do we leave?" Henry asked. "Tomorrow morning. I have already arranged the transport." Henry nodded. "Good. Let us finish this." Delta Point was a small station at the edge of explored space. It had been built centuries ago as a trading post, a place where different species could meet without fear of attack. Now, it would serve as the location for the most important meeting in galactic history. Henry arrived with a small delegation of his own. Patricia was there, along with Commander Daniel Price and Lieutenant Catherine Walsh. They were joined by diplomats and advisors, men and women who had spent months preparing for this moment. The Vexari Emperor was waiting in the main conference room. He was ancient, even by Vexari standards, with scales that had faded to a dull gray. His eyes were still black, but they no longer held the cruelty that Henry had seen in Zorath's gaze. Instead, they held something else. Weariness, defeat. "Admiral Cole," the Emperor said. His voice was soft, nothing like the harsh tones of his commanders. "I have heard much about you. And I have heard much about you, Emperor." Henry sat down across the table from him. "Shall we begin?" There were arguments and threats and moments when it seemed like everything would fall apart. But in the end, Both sides knew what had to happen. The Vexari could not win this war, and humanity did not want to fight forever. A new treaty was written. Under its terms, the Vexari Empire would release all enslaved species within its borders. Human territory would expand to include 30 new systems. A demilitarized zone would be established between the two powers, patrolled by ships from both sides. But the most important part of the treaty was the simplest. It stated that the Vexari Empire and the United Human Alliance were equals. Not master and servant, not superior and inferior. Equals. When the final document was ready, the Emperor looked at it for a long time without speaking. 10,000 years, he said finally. For 10,000 years, my ancestors ruled this galaxy. We conquered hundreds of species. We built an empire that stretched across the stars. And now, it ends. Because we underestimated a species that had barely learned to leave their home world. It does not have to end, Henry said. Your empire can survive. Your people can thrive. But only if you learn to share the galaxy instead of trying to control it. The Emperor looked up at him. You are a strange creature, Admiral. Any other species would use this moment to destroy us completely. They would take revenge for the centuries of suffering we caused. But you offer us peace. Revenge accomplishes nothing. It only creates more pain and more hatred. Humanity has learned this lesson many times throughout our history. We have no desire to become like you were. We want to build something better. And if we refuse your offer, if we choose to continue fighting, Henry's expression did not change. Then we will do what we must to protect our people. We did not want this war, Emperor, but we will finish it if we have to. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly he picked up the pen and signed the treaty. News of the peace spread quickly. Throughout human space, people celebrated in the streets. The war was over. They were safe. For the first time in 40 years, they could look at the stars without fear. But Henry did not celebrate. He returned to Earth and went to a small cemetery outside the city where he had grown up. There he stood before a simple gravestone marked with his wife's name. We did it, Mary, he said softly. We survived. Our children are safe. Our grandchildren will grow up in a galaxy where humanity is respected, not feared. He stood there for a long time, remembering the woman he had loved, the family they had built together, the future they had dreamed of. She had died before any of this happened, but he knew she would have been proud. General Patricia Hayes found him there as the sun was setting. The celebrations are starting, she said. People want to see you. They want to thank the man who saved them. Henry shook his head. I am just one person. Thousands of people made this victory possible. Scientists who built our weapons, soldiers who fought our battles, workers who kept everything running. They deserve the thanks, not me. Maybe, but you gave us hope when we had none. You made us believe we could win when everyone thought it was impossible. That matters, Admiral. Henry looked at her. What happens now? Now we rebuild, we explore, we make contact with the species the Vexari enslaved, and help them find their own paths. We become part of the galaxy instead of hiding from it. And the Vexari? They will adapt, or they will fade away. That is their choice to make, not ours. Henry nodded slowly. The future was uncertain, as it always was. There would be challenges ahead, problems that no one could predict. But humanity had proven something important. They had proven that they could face the impossible and win. As he walked away from the cemetery, Henry thought about the words he had spoken to Zorath all those months ago. Peace is over. Now we bring war. At the time he had meant it as a threat, a warning to an enemy that had underestimated humanity for too long. But now he understood that those words meant something else as well. The old peace, the false peace built on fear and submission, was truly over. In its place, a new kind of peace was beginning. A peace between equals. a peace that might actually last. Humanity had brought war to the galaxy, yes, but in doing so, they had also brought something else. They had brought hope. And for a species that had spent 10,000 years under the shadow of the Vexari Empire, hope was the most powerful weapon of all. The old admiral walked toward the city, toward the celebrations and the future. Behind him, the stars were coming out, billions of points of light scattered across the darkness. They no longer seemed threatening. They seemed like possibilities. The ship was dying. Admiral Henry Cole could feel it in the way the floor shook beneath his feet. He could hear it in the screaming alarms that filled every corridor of the starbound horizon. 3 enemy dreadnoughts had surrounded them, and there was nowhere to run. Henry was 73 years old. His hair had turned white many years ago, and his face was covered with the lines and wrinkles that come with age. His hands were not as steady as they once were, and his bones ached when he walked. But his mind was as sharp as it had ever been, and his gray eyes missed nothing. He stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the enemy vessels on the main screen. They were Vexari warships, each one 5 times larger than his own vessel. Their hulls were dark purple, covered with weapons that could tear through metal like paper. The Vexari had ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years, and their ships showed that power. "Admiral," said Commander Lisa Parker, his second in command. She was a young woman with short brown hair and worried eyes. "They are charging their weapons. If we do not surrender, they will destroy us." Henry did not answer immediately. He looked around the bridge at his crew. There were 47 people on this ship, men and women who had trusted him with their lives. They looked back at him now, waiting for his decision. "How many escape pods do we have?" Henry asked. 12, sir. Enough for everyone." Henry nodded slowly. "Prepare them. Get everyone off this ship." Lisa stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Sir, what about you?" "I will stay." "Admiral, that is suicide. The Vexari do not take prisoners. They will kill you." Henry smiled, but there was no happiness in it. "The Vexari do take prisoners, Commander, especially when those prisoners might have valuable information. I am the Supreme Commander of the United Human Defense Initiative. They will want to question me." Lisa's eyes went wide. "Sir, you cannot let them capture you. The things you know, the secrets you carry, if they break you—" "They will not break me," Henry said quietly. "Now follow my orders. Get the crew to safety." The evacuation happened quickly. Within minutes, 12 escape pods shot away from the dying ship, heading toward the nearest human colony. The Vexari vessels let them go. They were not interested in common soldiers. They wanted the admiral. Henry stood alone on the bridge as the enemy ships moved closer. He thought about his life, about all the years he had spent preparing for this moment. He thought about his wife, who had died 10 years ago, and his children, who were now grown with families of their own. He thought about Earth, the blue planet where humanity had been born. And he thought about the war that was coming. The Vexari did not know it yet, but they had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were capturing a weak old man. They thought humanity was a small, helpless species that could be crushed whenever they wished. They were wrong. A bright light filled the bridge as the Vexari began their boarding operation. Henry closed his eyes and waited. When he opened them again, he was surrounded by aliens. The Vexari were tall, almost 8 feet in height, with scales that ranged from green to gold. Their eyes were completely black, like pools of darkness, and their mouths were filled with sharp teeth. They wore armor made of a metal that humans had never been able to identify, and they carried weapons that could vaporize a man with a single shot. He was larger than the others, with golden scales that gleamed under the harsh lights. His armor was decorated with symbols that marked his rank. "I am High Commander Zorath," he said. His voice was deep and cold, like stones grinding together. You are now a prisoner of the Vexari Empire. Henry said nothing. He simply stood there, his hands at his sides, his face calm. Zorath studied him for a long moment. You are old, he said finally. I expected someone younger, someone stronger. He turned to his soldiers and made a sound that might have been laughter. This is what humanity sends to represent them? A creature who looks like he might die if someone pushed him too hard? The other Vexari joined in the laughter. It was an ugly sound, full of contempt and cruelty. Henry remained silent. He let them laugh. He let them mock him. It did not matter what they thought of him now. What mattered was what they would think later. They took him to Zorath's flagship, a massive vessel called the Claw of Empire. It was larger than any ship Henry had ever seen, a floating city of metal and weapons. Thousands of Vexari lived on board, soldiers and officers and workers who kept the great ship running. They threw Henry into a cell. It was a small room with metal walls and no windows. There was a hard bench to sleep on and nothing else. The door was solid, with no handle on the inside. Henry sat down on the bench and waited. He knew what would come next. They would let him sit here for a while, let him feel afraid and alone. Then they would take him for questioning. They would try to make him talk, to reveal humanity's secrets. But Henry had no intention of staying silent. He had every intention of talking. He was going to tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. He was going to confirm their suspicions about humanity's weakness. He was going to make them feel confident and superior. And then he was going to watch their confidence turn to fear. The door opened, and two guards entered. They grabbed Henry roughly and dragged him through the corridors of the ship. Other Vexari stopped to stare at him as he passed. Some of them pointed and laughed. A few spat at his feet. Henry memorized every corridor, every turn, every door. He counted the guards and noted their positions. He observed the ship's layout and identified its weak points. Even as a prisoner, even as an old man being dragged to his interrogation, he was gathering information. They brought him to a large room filled with Vexari officers. Zorath stood in the center, his arms crossed over his chest. Behind him, large screens showed images of human space, the 12 small colony worlds that humanity called home. "Do you know why you are here, human?" Zorath asked. Henry looked up at him. "I imagine you want information." "Correct. Your species has been quiet for too long. We suspect you are planning something. We want to know what." Henry almost laughed. Planning something. If only Zorath knew how right he was. If only he knew what humanity had been doing for the past 40 years. "I will tell you whatever you want to know," Henry said. Zorath's black eyes narrowed with suspicion. "That was easier than I expected." "I am an old man," Henry replied. "I have no desire to be tortured. Ask your questions, and I will answer them." The trap was set. Now all Henry had to do was wait for the right moment to close it.